All right. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in for the second Tap Talks Happy Hour. So today we actually have two zoologists from the Dallas Zoo, which I'm sure many of y'all have been to in the DFW area. So we have Ryan Hanley, who is the Assistant Supervisor of Animal Ambassadors, and Kevin Graham, who is the Supervisor of Birds, both at the Dallas Zoo. And so today they're going to talk us about penguin conservation.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in for the second.
I definitely have speakers on.
So today we have two zoologists from the Dallas Zoo, which I'm sure many of y'all have been to in the DFW area.
Sorry about that.
And now we're good. Okay.
But yeah, whenever y'all are ready, if you want to share your screen, and we'll get started.
Get us started now.
There we go. So I'm Ryan. I'm going to start the presentation. I'm Assistant Supervisor of Ambassador Animals. And then later I'll kind of switch over to Kevin. He is the Supervisor of Birds. But before we get started, I want to preface, this is really Kevin's project. He's done all the hard work and the dedication to this project. I just got involved more recently. So I was lucky enough to travel to South Africa with Kevin in December, learn all about the project. I was so inspired that I just couldn't wait to share it more. So I've just kind of been helping him tell the story, but it's really his story to tell, and he's done a lot of the hard work involved. Now, I'm going to start with a little bit of the background and conservation of penguins, and he'll go into more details on the specific project that we're working on right now in South Africa. So here's a worldwide map of the distribution of penguins. Contrary to what we see on TV and in the movies, not all penguins are found on the ice. There's penguins throughout most of the southern hemisphere. They're actually found all the way from the equator in the Galapagos Islands down through South America, Central America. There's parts of Africa that have penguins, Australia, New Zealand. So a lot of penguins all over the world. Most penguins are found in areas with strong upwellings and often on islands because there's less predators for them. So this is a great little graphic that we got from Peppermint Narwhal. There's currently 18 species of penguins listed in the world. And I say currently because as scientists start to do genetics on these guys, sometimes a single species, it becomes two as they do a little bit more genetics. Of these 18 species, there's only 5 listed as least concern by the IUCN. So 3 are threatened, 5 are vulnerable, and 5 are endangered. So 13 of 18 species are currently at risk. So that's 72% of all penguins. Now, this is also from the IUCN, and this shows their current trends by these different species. So you can see a lot of red arrows. So that's decreasing trends. So of all the different types of penguins, there's very few, even the ones that are stable, that are, even the ones that are not endangered, that are not decreasing right now. So penguins in general really do need our help. Now, from this point on, though, we'll be specifically focusing on one species of penguin, and that is the African penguin. So this is a photo of an African penguin here. And if you have been to the Dallas Zoo before, we do have about 15 on grounds. We have a beautiful penguin habitat that Kevin's in charge of, as well as a couple at our wildlife show, and then a couple at my area, the Animal Ambassadors. But there's a handful of other zoos that have penguins as well. Now, this is a distribution of the African penguin. So if we zoom in here, you can see they're not only found in South Africa, but they actually do extend up to Namibia as well. But we specifically are focusing on the breeding colonies, which are all off of the southern coast of South Africa. Now, a little bit about these guys. Not only are they called African penguins, they're also sometimes referred to as black-footed penguins because of their dark-colored feet. Cape penguins because they're found throughout both the eastern and the western Cape. And they're also called jackass penguins. Now, if you've ever met a penguin, it's not because they're mean, but they can be quite mean. So jackass is quite fitting for them. Now, a typical African penguin only weighs about 2 to 3.5 kilograms in weight. So they're not huge. They're kind of a medium-sized penguin. And they're about 40 to 60 centimeters in height. Now, I know that doesn't seem important, but it will be important later when a little graphic. These guys are penguins, so they eat fish. They're pelagic schooling. They eat mostly pelagic schooling fish, so everything from anchovies to sardines, sometimes things like herring and mackerel as well. And they really are perfectly adapted for water. So they're a completely flightless bird, but we like to say they fly through the water. They're really built for speed through the water. A typical African penguin would usually swim about 4 miles per hour, but they can swim as fast as 15 miles per hour as needed. Now, if you're driving in a school zone, you're only going 20, it seems like you're going very slow. But in the water, 15 mile per hour is quite quite incredible. So Michael Phelps, we all know Michael Phelps. He's one of the world's greatest swimmers. He swims about 4 to 6 miles per hour. So these guys can do laps around Michael Phelps. They usually are in the first 100 feet of water while they do their fishing, but they can dive to over 300 meters if they absolutely need to. They'll also swim an incredible distance, about 30 to 100 kilometers in any direction in search of food. Now, there's one more photo I wanted to show you. There is this penguin. So right here, you guys can see 2 penguins next to each other. So the one on your left is not sick. He's actually molting. So if you see any penguins that look like that throughout our presentation, what they do is they actually molt all their feathers at once. And that way they have the perfect wetsuit to find food. So I won't touch on this too much, but if you see any photos like that, we were at the time in South Africa. These guys were molting. They're not sick. And there's one more. This is actually one of our penguins at the Dallas Zoo molting. So if you come to the Dallas Zoo and you see a penguin like this, again, not sick, just molting, getting new feathers. That way they have the perfect wetsuit. They typically do this about once a year. A little bit about these guys' reproduction. So typically they are monogamous, so they will form a bonded pair and they'll usually stay with their mate for life. Now they will—
Hey, Ryan, can I interrupt you for just a second? So whenever the penguins are molting, can they still swim and everything, or do they just have to fast during that time?
That's a great question. They cannot swim when they molt. So they can get into shallow water if they need to cool down. It does get quite hot in South Africa in the summers. So what they usually do is they'll go from eating about 10% of their body weight to sometimes as much as 50% of their body weight, and they'll almost double their body weight. They'll get really chubby. Then they'll usually leave the water. It takes about a week or so to lose all their feathers. As you saw, they look kind of ridiculous. And then they'll take another week or so to grow all those new feathers back. Now, again, they're not going to be going for long swims, not going to be hunting for food. They'll be fasting and just living off that fat reserves. But if it does get too hot, they can get into some shallow water and kind of cool down as needed. Great question. So they're monogamous, we were saying. They will typically form a monogamous relationship for life. Now, they will sometimes switch mates if a mate was eaten by a predator, or maybe they're not working out, they're not creating successful eggs. But they also will return to their natal nesting colony, which is quite interesting, and sometimes even their same particular nest. So if they nested in this particular part of the island this year, they may come to that exact same nest next year. A typical clutch size is usually 2 eggs, but typically only one of those eggs survives, so they'll usually take care of the stronger chick. But sometimes if it's a really good year, they will have 2, and they will fledge at about 60 to 130 days. Now, penguins grow quite quickly. They'll grow to their adult size in just a month or so. But if you do come to the zoo, you can see we have penguin chicks on habitat. The easiest way to tell the difference is they are not black and white. They're more of a silvery color, and they'll remain that color for 1 to 2 years. In that time, they will leave their natal grounds where they were born, and they will go out to sea. They'll hunt, they'll fish, they'll become adult penguins, and then they'll come back, they'll molt their feathers to that black and white color. Now, this right here you guys are looking at is what would be a traditional penguin nest. It's a guano burrow. So they actually dig into their own guano, which I'm sure most of you know is poop. So on the beaches that they're from and the islands they're from, it's quite sandy. Now, when you dig into sand, it collapses often. It gets too heavy. If they dig deep, that sand will collapse. So after thousands and thousands of years, the guano collects up, and it's very spongy and kind of soft. And they can use their very powerful back legs and dig these really cool nests. Well, unfortunately, these nests no longer exist. So that was one of the last remaining guano nests in the entire world. We know of 17. 17 remain in the entire world. Now, why is this? Unfortunately, it's because of humans. So guano is a great fertilizer. It's full of nitrogen, phosphate, potassium. We use guano a lot in Texas as fertilizer. Sometimes it's bat guano. It's probably not penguin guano in Texas, but bat guano, bird guano is often used worldwide as a fertilizer. So when they figured out that this guano was a great fertilizer, they began harvesting it. So sometime in the mid-19th century, people were being shipped over to these islands and scraping this guano, putting it into these bags, and then sticking it in these large guano houses to be distributed. So in this photo, you guys can see that there's just a massive amount of this guano being collected. It was estimated that over 200,000 tons were removed from South Africa islands in that time. Now, this was being used on mainland Africa and also actually being shipped all the way to places like Europe and Asia as fertilizer. So I think in the next photos, here we go. This is one of the islands we're doing a lot of this restoration work on. It's called Bird Island, and these guano huts still remain. So you can see they're not fully intact, but they are still there, and you can see how big they are. They would bag up that guano and actually completely stack it to the rafters until they could get a boat in and take that away to the mainland. So quite a lot of guano.
All right, Ryan, if I can interrupt you, we actually have several questions now I want to go through, if you don't mind. So one is back in the molting. How long does it take to molt?
So a full molt is usually about 2 to 3 weeks, and they usually do that about once a year.
And this one, I think, might have just been a joke, but I'm actually curious. So they can just eat and eat, and it's good for them to be chubby. Do they have to worry about obesity like humans do? Do we know why there's a difference?
So I'm sure at the zoo, absolutely, any animal that gets too overweight, just like we do, it's more pressure on your bones and on your systems. But in their natural environment, it's probably pretty rare to find a very, very chubby penguin. Now, you want to have obviously a well filled out penguin, but these guys are working really hard for their food. They have to go out and hunt. It's quite a lot of work. They eat small schooling fish, so they have to swim a lot to get these schooling fish. So usually if they're satiated, they're not going to be continuing to eat unless they know they're going through this molt. And their body kind of tells them that time to bulk up, molt is coming.
Okay. And then are there laws that are preventing guano extraction now?
Yes. So now they no longer collect guano. It happened for about 150 years, but they did stop that about 50 years ago. So no longer are they collecting guano. But unfortunately, this slide, I was actually going to mention it, guano, as much as the birds are pooping, it collects quite slowly. So was that the last question?
There is one more, but so the next one is
in this slide.
Yeah, it's just where do they nest now? And I think we are about to figure that out. So you can answer that during your slides.
Absolutely, yes. So this next photo is actually 3 penguins that we just took this photo while we were there in December. And you can actually see in the background, there's some other birds as well. This island has several types of seabirds. So not just penguins pooping, but lots of other birds pooping. And these penguins, I mentioned, they only stand, about 40 to 60 centimeters. Well, at one time on Bird Island, it was estimated that the guano reached 3 to 5 meters in height. So if this penguin's only about 60 centimeters and you stack them head to head, that would be the height of about 5 to 8 penguins. So that's a lot of shit. Lots and lots of poop. So there's a lot of guano, and they removed all that guano. Now, as much as these penguins are still pooping and all those other seabirds are pooping as well, it's estimated that the guano would have to collect for 700 to 900 years to accumulate for them to use that guano as a burrow again. So penguins, unfortunately, may not even be around for the next 700 to 900 years, especially not at the rate they're going. So it's the guano, unfortunately, is no longer a feasible option for them. So unfortunately, that's not the only thing that hurt these guys. When the guano scrapers were sent over to these islands, they were not only eating some adult penguins, they discovered that penguin eggs were quite delicious. So sometime around the late 19th century to the early 20th century, people began eating penguin eggs. So not only were the guano collectors eating them on the islands, so they had fresh eggs, they were harvesting them and bringing them to the mainland. It became such a delicacy, they were actually served on the Titanic, and they were served every Wednesday at Parliament in South Africa. They were such, a delicacy and high value. Well, not only that, when the people would come over to these islands, they would collect these penguin eggs, but they wanted to make sure there was no embryos in them because no one wants to eat an egg with embryo. So they did this method called break one, take one. They'd come over to the island, they would break all the eggs they could find. So no matter even if there was penguin chicks in them, they didn't care. They'd break all the eggs. Then they'd leave for maybe, a week or so, 10 days, and they'd come back. And by then the penguins had all laid fresh eggs that weren't yet hatching, weren't yet developing, and then they would take those eggs. So it was estimated that between 1920 and 1950, about 48% of all African penguin eggs were collected for human consumption. So another thing that was just really hitting them hard at this time. If that wasn't enough, they experience a whole slew of other threats today as well. One of the largest ones in the Eastern Cape, where the biggest population of penguins, South African penguins, are right now, is oil spills. And this comes about mostly with offshore bunkering. So what happens is for big ships to come in, they have to pay a port fee if they want to come to port and refill on oil. So what they've done is these companies have these offshore bunkering sites where they can just hook up boat to boat, full line over, and fill up their boat. Well, it's quite dangerous, but they avoid that big fee of coming to port. Well, it is legal in South Africa. As of 2016, it became legal to do this offshore bunkering, but it can become illegal if any of these 3 things are happening. One is if there is after dark. They're not allowed to offshore bunker after dark. 2, if there's elevated wind speeds, they are not allowed to offshore bunker. And 3, if there's elevated waves. So the whole point of those 3 rules is those are the 3 scenarios that would most likely cause a spill. Well, in 2019, July 2019, there was an oil spill, and all 3 of those were being broken. It was at night, high winds, high waves. Well, unfortunately, the fee for them spilling oil everywhere was so little, it makes it worth the risk for them. They'd rather just pay the fee of spilling oil than coming into port. So on that particular date, July 2019, there was estimated to be 200 to 400 liters of oil spilled, and these penguins were actually in that spill. So they found lots of penguins covered in oil. Penguins rely on having their feathers in perfect shape for insulation and swimming. So even a small amount of oil, much less than you see in this photo, can actually completely disturb their swimming, cause them to become non-insulated and die. Disease is a big problem as well. Avian influenza has spread through populations in South Africa, and it's a big concern. Changing seas, we all know that we're experiencing a threat of changing seas, ocean currents, acidity, all that can affect them. It actually not only affects the penguins themselves, but it can affect their population of fish that they're relying on. And it can actually cause them to go one way thinking the fish are there and the fish are not even there. Pollution is a big one as well. Plastic pollution, chemical pollution. It can cause entanglement, ingestion, all kinds of problems. But arguably one of the biggest problems facing penguins in the 21st century is overfishing. Even if we get the penguins numbers up right now, they just simply don't have the resources to eat in many parts of the Cape. The Eastern Cape's a little bit better, but the Western Cape, they're experiencing a lot of declines in fisheries that these penguins rely on. So you can imagine, after seeing all of these threats, the ones that we talked about from the past and the ones today, that their conservation status is kind of grim. Right now, they're currently listed as endangered. That's of the IUCN as of 2018. But when they get reassessed later this year, they will almost certainly be listed as critically endangered. We are down to the last 1% remaining, 1% of South African penguins. So in 19th century, there was about 4 million. By the 20th century, 1.5 million. By the 21st century, 200,000. And today, significantly less than 50,000 penguins remain in Africa. There's only 16 breeding colonies, less than 1%. Now, at these current rates, they're estimated to go functionally extinct by 2026, so 6 years functionally extinct. Now, that means that in the wild, they would have a very slim to none chance of being able to reproduce enough to sustain themselves, and they're estimated to go fully extinct in the wild by 2034. So Kevin, who's going to tell you next about a little bit about this. This is actually a sign they have up in Africa, by the way. So it says Beat 2026. They're kind of trying to promote this. What can we do to help? But one of my favorite things that Kevin always says is we've done all those things I talked about. Guano scraping, nests, depriving them of nests, egg harvesting, all these things. And they're still around. So it shows that they are resilient, that maybe it's not too late. Maybe we do have a chance to still help them before it's too late. So I want to just go over this super quick so I give Kevin plenty of time. But
all right, I do want to pause you real quick before you go on. So if they're like the dodo and their eggs are so valuable, couldn't they, or like it's surprising they're not just sustainably farmed. Is there a reason why we're not doing that?
So they're no longer collecting the eggs as well either. So that's great. So no longer are they, well, I can't say never. I'm sure there's always poachers who sometimes, pick a penguin egg and try it. But the eggs themselves are being pretty well protected now in Africa. So we don't have to worry about people collecting the eggs anymore.
But what if people, I think it's talking about like actually farming them, kind of like what we do with chickens. Like, why don't we farm them if their eggs are so valuable?
That's a good question.
Extremely expensive to maintain under human care. They're very difficult to maintain under human care, and they're very, very slow breeders. So all of the factors that are involved in that would make it extremely difficult to have a sustainable population for wild reintroduction. There are zoos all around the world that work with African penguins and have what's called a reservoir population. So the birds will never go fully extinct from the world because there's human care reservoir populations that are very well maintained. But to try and increase the numbers through human involvement is a cost that it would be just astronomical. You're looking somewhere in the neighborhood of about $10 to $15 per day to feed a single penguin.
Gotcha. Those would be expensive eggs. All right. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So I don't want to dwell on this one too much, so I want to give Kevin plenty of time. But The AZA is the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, and they're kind of the ones who govern or accredit the certain zoos. So the Dallas Zoo, the Fort Worth Zoo, a lot of the big zoos are AZA zoos, and they hold the highest standard of to us. Since we're accredited zoo at Dallas Zoo, they hold us to the highest standard of care for not only our animals but our staff as well. Well, they started this program in 2015 called SAFE, Saving Animals from Extinction. And they wanted to focus on a lot of animals that really need our help. So in 2015, they originally named 10 species. Now that has expanded to 27, but 10 species that really need our help. And that included everything from black rhinos to elephants, sea turtles. But one of those was the African penguin. So once they established those 10 species, they made a team, a committee that kind of assessed what are the major threats to these animals. And they laid out 7 major threats to penguins. They're listed here below, but you can see the last one is nests. And that's one of the biggest ones. And they assigned each of these a project manager. So Kevin Graham, who you're going to hear from next, he was actually assigned the nest project. So he's been working really, really hard on this nest project. So without further ado, Kevin's going to tell you all about the nests.
Okay, nests. And one of the things that the AZA SAFE program highlighted as a critical need for penguins was a space for them to successfully raise their young. There's been organizations that have tried nests in the wild with penguins going back as much as 15 to 20 years, but they never had the resources to look into it properly. They knew that there was a problem. They knew that there were failed nests due to temperature, due to predation, all the different factors that were involved. And they knew that something had to be done, but they never had the resources to look into it properly. What we did with the AZA SAFE project for the nests was consolidated all the different zoos, the government organizations, the non-government organizations, researchers, everyone that we could find that had any kind of input, and put them together and came up with a plan. And this was going back about 3.5 years now. So this has been ongoing for a while. It takes quite a long time to do things right sometimes. And then after we came up with, here's the plan, here's how we need to proceed with it, we had to test. And there were mandates that had to be involved with it. One of the mandates was working with the environmental affairs departments in South Africa. Anything we put in the wild had to be recyclable, had to be environmentally friendly, had to be reusable. It had to have zero long-term impact on the environment. Finding materials that can survive in extremely harsh coastal environments that are also environmentally friendly and can be recycled, reused, repurposed when the lifespan is over is not easy. I worked closely with researchers at Bristol University, the University of Cape Town, Pretoria, Owens Corning, the Department of Environmental Affairs in South Africa, just organization after organization. And we found 6 materials that were viable and met every criteria we needed. We then looked at the research, let me try that in English here, research that was available on the historical guano nests, and that went back into the 60s and 70s when there were actually a few guano nests remaining on Dasan Island, and we found size, shape, and some basic environmental parameters for the nests. It was enough to get us started, so we knew what the entrance size had to be, what the internal dimensions had to be, the shape, the slope, and we knew temperature and humidity with rough ranges. Temperature and humidity, as it turns out, with penguin nests is extremely important. If it's too warm, the eggs don't survive. If it's too cool, the eggs don't survive. It had to be in a very tight range, and finding artificial nests that simulates Mother Nature takes a lot of research. After putting together 15 designs and 6 materials, we field tested those under a controlled environment for about 6 months, taking temperatures and humidities and barometric pressures, and found that 2 of the designs and 2 of the materials met our needs. We took those 2 designs and the one material that stood out above the other, and then built 200 nests and put them in colonies for a year. We looked at any degradation of the nests. Did they last? Did they perform? Did the penguins like them? As much as it sounds strange, if we put them out there and the penguins look at them and walk away, we haven't succeeded. Turns out with those 200 nests, we had about a 94% usage rate on them and about 83% hatched and fledged chicks. The old design nests that other teams had tried when they were just trying to find any solution that would work, were lucky to hit 7 to 9% success rates. So we knew we were onto something. Once we got there, the next step was, how do we get enough resources and enough backing to build thousands of nests that we need? We worked with Creative Animal Foundation, and this is the trailer for a film we made. Now, I would absolutely love to show you the entire film, but it's 12 minutes long, which not exactly fitting into the time frame here, but it is available on the savingpenguins.org website. The film is extremely well done by Stephanie Arnay and Tim Davison from Creative Animal Foundation. They came out and worked with us on one of the islands and in the manufacturing facility to make the penguin film. And like I said, you can see the entire video there at savingpenguins.org. One of the things that we knew from the very beginning was this couldn't be a project that those of us here in North America, here in the United States, did by ourselves. It had to involve all the community aspects in South Africa, the governmental agencies, the non-governmental agencies, the researchers, the environmental groups, the people that are over there. And these are their penguins. These are their beloved birds. So we had to make sure that we had their buy-in for it. What we did was make sure that we reached out to everybody. We didn't leave people out. If they had an opinion, it was heard. And then once we got everything organized, we knew we had to build several thousand of these nests. We set up a manufacturing facility in Cape St. Francis, South Africa, and we put together a team of 8 people that build these nests for us. They live in one of the townships just on the other side of where the factory is, and we bring them in. They've been working, building nests for over a year now. They're on the same 8 people the entire time. This is what they do. And one of my mandates was, we pay well over the national average. We want these people to not only have a passion for making nests to save a critically endangered species, but we want them to make money while they're doing it so they can support their families. And on the island there, you see the lighthouse in the background. The guy on the left-hand side is Dean. He's one of the people that makes nests for us there. And he was interested, and we were able to bring him out to the island so he could see the penguins and see the nests going onto the island.
We have a quick question, Kevin, if you don't mind. How long does it take to make each one of the little penguin houses?
We've got 20 molds in the factory, and it takes them a day to make 20 nests. But then those nests have to sit on the molds for 24 to 36 hours while they cure. Then the nest comes off of the mold and cures for another 24 to 36 hours. And then it gets set aside to dry the rest of the way for another day. And then we drill the ventilation hole pattern into it. So all told, it's between 3 and 4 days to build one nest, but we can have multiple rounds going at a time. Takes about 20 a day is our maximum. with the team we have in place.
Thank you.
And unfortunately, these nests have to last for the long term. As Ryan mentioned, the guano is just not accumulating the way it did over the course of thousands of years. It used to be in the 1800s, the 1400s, the 1200s, that there were not only millions of penguins, there were millions of cormorants, millions of gannets, millions of all these different seabirds, the skuas, the albatross, the petrels, just millions and millions and millions of these seabirds out on the island colonies. And the guano accumulated over centuries and centuries. When they scraped it all off, it's gone. It would take hundreds of years to even get a thin layer of it, of a foot to foot and a half. They need at least 3 feet deep minimum to properly nest. So we've got to have something for them for the long term. And these nests are right now the solution for them. And then these nests are built to last about 12 to 15 years. If all goes well, that 12 to 15 years can produce as many as 36 chicks in a perfect scenario per nest on it. Normally, we would expect about 24 chicks per nest with the number of breeding seasons that we have available in that span.
Is that just one pair of penguins per nest can make that many chicks?
It's the penguins nest twice a year, and they can lay 2 eggs per clutch, but only one of them normally hatches, and the success rate is about 50% or so. So if they lay 4 eggs a year, you expect maybe 1 chick to survive out of that for that pair per year. So if you've got 2,000 penguins in a colony, that's 1,000 pairs. In a good year, you might get 250 to 500 offspring from it, which that goes back to how slow they breed. And it takes 4 to 6 years for them to reach breeding age to start with. So there's a lot of factors against them.
Thank you.
Okay. If we used any materials that were longer lasting, there have been people that have in the past that have tried a material like fiberglass. We're pulling all of those out of the colonies because not only did they not work, but they're really bad environmentally for the areas that they've been put into. So they got 2 strikes against them. They didn't work properly, and they're not so great for the environment. One of the things we're finding as we pull those fiberglass nests out is nobody can do anything with them. They either have to go in the landfill or we store them, which right now we're storing them. We're not throwing them in the landfill because we're hoping we can find something to do with them to recycle them. We found a place up in Denmark that can recycle them, but shipping fiberglass nests from South Africa to Denmark gets a little expensive. The assembly, once we get them out onto the island, which you saw the helicopter, that's really the only way we can get them onto a couple of the colonies is to helicopter them out in a sling. Once you get the assembly going, it's not this fast. Okay.
Can I ask a couple of questions real quick before you go on? One, what material did you end up using for these nests? It said you tested quite a few different ones.
This material is based on Duro 9, which is a ceramic composite. And one of the reasons that we went with this, not only because it gave us the perfect environmental temperature inside the nest, but it's also when these nests reach the end of their lifespan, this can be shredded up and it's used as an insulation material for houses in South Africa. So when we're done with the nest, we can send them to a facility there, they shred them, and it's used for insulation.
Awesome. So we actually have quite a few questions. If you don't mind pausing for a minute, let's do them. So what are the reasons for the high mortality rate among penguin chicks?
Right now, one of the biggest reasons, well, we'll go with 2 reasons on it because they're about equal. Food availability is extremely compromised because of overfishing. And for those that aren't in nests, the risk of predation and overheating is extremely high. The nests provide the proper temperature and humidity for the chicks. But right now, we're in the process of ramping up our production, getting as many nests into the colonies as we can. We've put about 1,340 nests into colonies. As of about a week ago, we put a few more in. There's right now about between 13 and 16,000 penguin pairs left in the wild. So we're nowhere near the number of nests that we need. Some of those penguins won't need artificial nests. They find areas on Robben Island where they burrow underneath a shrub, and the root structure of the shrub gives them a safe area to burrow. But we estimate that we need between 4,000 and 5,000 nests in the wild. We've got about 1,300 roughly right now. So that leaves a lot of penguins that are being attacked by kelp gulls or other predators, or they're sitting out in the sun. They're not built to be out in the sun. That dark black back they have, it's a heat sink. So if they're sitting on the nest and they're not sheltered like they used to be in their guano, that's just baking them. And they have to make a choice of, do you overheat as an adult penguin and possibly die of heat stroke, or do you go out into the ocean and cool down? As soon as they go in the ocean, they leave their eggs or chicks exposed for predators. So there's a lot that is going against them. The nests give them every option to succeed, and we have a lot higher success rate in the nests than we see in the birds that don't have nests.
Thank you. And then I think that answered one of these other questions. We only have one more for now. What is the lifespan of the South African penguin usually?
In the wild, if they make it past their first 2 years, which there's a very high mortality rate in the first 2 years, if they make it past those first 2 years, about 10 to 12 years is a reasonable lifespan in the wild. It's median life expectancy. Under human care, median life expectancy is about 24 and a half years. So we more than double it with the birds that are under human care. But there is a high mortality. So birds that go out to sea and have to fish for 1.5 to 2 years while they're developing and reaching breeding age, a lot of them don't survive.
We actually had one more question come in before you go on. Are the holes for ventilation, is that airflow to cool the penguins?
They got ahead of me just a little bit.
Sorry.
I'll answer it now. So the nests are a two-piece design. There's the actual nest structure, which you can see front and center there, and it's got the ventilation holes in the top and in the back. And then there's a fly sheet that goes over top of it. There's a 5 centimeter gap that's set between the fly sheet and the nest structure. And all of that was done working with the different researchers, doing thermodynamic studies, doing wind studies. It's all based on air movement and heat dissipation. So where those holes are, it helps with heat dissipation. Where there's the gap between the nest and the fly sheet, that allows wind to come through and carry the heat out. It looks like a little igloo. It looks like a little ceramic doghouse, but there's a tremendous amount of science that went into how does air move through these nests? How does heat move through the nests? How do we maintain humidity? We want 80 to 85% humidity. Any higher than that and the tick load in the nests becomes an issue. Any lower than that and the chicks and eggs may not survive. So there's just a tremendous amount of time and research that had to go into getting it exactly where we needed to get hatch rates and success rates to match the guano burrows. The guano burrows that Ryan talked about were really valuable to us because we put sensors inside those guano burrows for about the last 2 years, and we're using that to compare with our nests. And what we see is an almost perfect match between the guano burrows that are remaining, those 17 guano burrows. There were 19, 2 of them collapsed last year on it. So those 17 remaining guano burrows and our artificial nests, it's almost a perfect match, temperature and humidity. So we know that they're working because we have that nice control going of this is what a natural nest does, this is what our artificial nest does, and they match almost perfectly. Okay. And then once we're out on the island, getting them in place is fun. These islands are remote. And then this island is 9 kilometers out into the middle of the Indian Ocean. There's not cars or carts or anything. It's carrying these 35-pound nests from the boathouse where we drop them with the helicopter, and they're assembled to where they need to go on the island. The island is about 29 acres. Some of the nests are really far away from that boathouse. And like I said, they're about 35 pounds. The wind is normally blowing between 50 and 90 knots on this island. So it's kind of like carrying a sail with you. The time that Ryan and I were out on the island, we had about 300 nests that were ready to go in. We got about 150 of those put in, and then the Marine Rangers that work on the island protecting the birds there put the others in over the course of the next few weeks or so. We've got about 450 or so nests on Bird Island right now, and we're seeing about 90% usage rate. We're in the middle of breeding season right now, so we've got a lot of little penguins in these nests, and that's what we want to see. The challenge is there's about 2,300, 2,400 pairs on Bird Island, so we need a lot more nests out there. And we're working on it. We've got about 400 more nests built, ready to go out as soon as breeding season ends. And penguins start moving in. They know a good thing when they see it, and there's usually some debates over who gets the prime real estate. This pair had the prime real estate really fast. They moved in almost immediately after this nest was down, and the 3 days that we were on the island, they never left. They kept this nest as their own, and it turned out they raised 2 chicks in this nest. So they knew the good house when they found it.
I want to really quickly jump in. So when Kevin and I were there, it was December. So it was actually like almost 2 full months before the first breeding season of the year. So in theory, penguins shouldn't really be building their nests yet. But when we put them down, we had penguins up every night, checking out nests, fighting over nests. Sometimes they'd be in, one day and then one the next, trying out their prime real estate. So it was really fun to see them already choosing, it was like house hunters, choosing their favorite house.
And as I said, we've seen pretty good usage. The future is long-term. Like I said, we have a lot of nests we still need to build, a lot of nests that we still need to put in place in it, and it's not an entirely inexpensive prospect to do it. It costs about $50 per nest to build them, and then the cost of getting them onto the island. As you can imagine, renting helicopters and boats is not the least expensive part of the project, but it's a necessary part. We've got some great partners over in South Africa that help out with some of the costs and the logistics. The number one is Dyer Island Conservation Trust and African Penguin and Seabird Sanctuary in Hansby, which is where Dyer Island Penguin Colony is. They've been working with penguin conservation for 20 plus years. Their founder and owner is the most passionate man when it comes to animal and environmental conservation you'll ever meet. He helps us out tremendously, as with the rest of his employees. There's no way we could do this without the help that Dyer Island and African Penguin and Seabird Sanctuary provide. And this is one of the pairs that moved in, and they started building a nest almost immediately. You can see all the dried plant material. They drug that in and built themselves a nice little nest. Again, this was December. They shouldn't have been nesting yet. They were getting a jump start.
Can I ask a quick question, Kevin? So has there been any investigation into using some sort of biodegradable material to make the nest, like maybe another animal's guano?
And anything that's biodegradable, for the most part, can't survive the marine environment. In it, we tested out some materials, and we were getting about 1 year to 2 years maximum of the projected lifespan of the controlled. And if they did meet any kind of duration that we needed, then they couldn't maintain the proper internal conditions. So there were a lot of challenges with it. And we'll go through this portion pretty quickly. Some of the things that the penguins are facing: egg predation, Cape fur seals, dassies are bringing ticks into the colonies. The Cape gannets there are an interesting one. They're an endangered species as well. In some of the colonies, especially Bird Island, they're actually increasing their range, which puts pressure on the penguins. So you've got an endangered species and a soon-to-be critically endangered species competing for the same space. Sets up a really hard dilemma there. Tourists, housing developments, cars, cats, dogs, boats, a little bit of everything comes in. This one shows an ecological trap situation where food isn't really available, but the penguins think it should be based on all the environmental cues. So you get what's called an arrested molt. The birds on the left-hand side, those are birds that didn't properly prepare for the molt process. They didn't have enough food. They didn't have enough reserves, so they got stopped in the middle of the molt. There's rehab facilities like African Penguin Seabird Sanctuary, Sand Cobb, and others that bring these birds in. They feed them fish, they fatten them up, and they finish their molt. If they can be caught, they can be saved. If they don't go in for rehab, they usually don't survive. And then on the right-hand side, there's some of the old nests that were used that were really unsuccessful, either by size, shape, temperature, humidity, any number of factors. These were some of the originals. The people were trying, they just didn't have the right resources. Some of the groups we work with, a lot of different groups. When you've got a lot of groups, you've got a lot of opinions and a lot of thoughts. So trying to keep everyone on the same page is fun. And
then I'm just going to quickly touch on some things. If you guys were hopefully as inspired as I was when I went to South Africa, there's a lot of things you guys can do at home. One of the easiest things is download this app, the Monterey Bay Aquarium Seafood Watch. You just type in the type of fish you're looking for, salmon, whatever it is. It'll tell you what is sustainable, what's not, and that's not only to help animals, but sometimes it's for you to avoid pesticides and chemicals in your food. So that's a really easy one. Also, just reduce your footprint on the earth. That will not only help penguins, but help all animals all over the world. So anything you can do. Right now at the Dallas Zoo, we're celebrating Plastic-Free July. So we make a commitment to try to use less single-use plastics every day in July, and then that hopefully develops a habit that will continue the year round. So if that's something you're interested in, you can join us next year if you visit plasticfreejuly.com. Other ways you guys can help is on our savingpenguins.org website. You'll find these adorable plush animals. They are all made organically, and so you can feel free to purchase those. The chicks are 20, the adults are 25, or you can get the chick and the adult at the middle there for 45. They're 100% sustainable. I just sent them to someone as a baby gift. They're really cute, and some of that money goes back to help save the penguins. On our website, you can also sponsor a nest. So you can either do a nest on its own, which is on the left, or a nest with a lot of electronic sensors. So a nest alone is $50. That's about what it cost us to build the nest. Or if you want to do the one with the sensors, it's about $250. So that'll be all the electronic equipment to keep them monitored. Also, you can just help us out by following us on Save Penguin African Penguins at both. That's our handle at both Facebook or Instagram, and we have the most current stories. We have adorable penguin chick videos and photos to follow, but you can find more information at there and follow us on those areas. And last but not least, you guys can also follow us at savingpenguins.org. There's all kinds of things at that website, but we wanted to end with a joke, and it's, why did the penguin cross the road? And of course, it's to get to an artificial nest.
All right, so we do have a few questions coming in. Anyone else who wants to ask questions, go ahead and put them in the live chat on YouTube, and I will relay them. So one of them is, let's see if I understand this. Pesticides used here in Dallas, can those actually affect animals in South Africa?
Shockingly, actually it can. So obviously the majority of that's going to be affecting local animals, but our Trinity River does lead all the way to the ocean. And if it gets picked up by certain ocean currents, it can definitely make its way all the way around the world. So I know years ago, a boat carrying rubber duckies actually dumped its load, and those rubber duckies were found for the next 10 years all over the world. So ocean currents can easily carry it worldwide.
Okay. So what did the sensors detect exactly in the nest?
It's temperature, humidity, heat stress index, and barometric pressure.
Would y'all be able to actually use that information to adjust anything by having that in there?
It tells us if the nests are performing properly over the short and the long term, and I can access all the data from every nest here in Dallas. So it uploads it to a cloud server, so I can look at any nest in South Africa that has that sensor. And if I start to see a trend where the nests are falling out of the range that we're targeting, then we start looking at, is there something going on with the nests? Are they not performing the way we want? There's nothing we can change, unfortunately, even though some of the ideas that came up was, can you air condition a nest? Can you put in a fan? We don't have that technology with it, and it wouldn't have done much anyways in the environment. essentially it tells us, are we hitting our goals? Because we know the nests can perform exactly like the guano nests. This is just verifying it. And we have to make sure, short-term and long-term, that we maintain the perfect environment for the penguins. One of the challenges they had is if they went into one of those old artificial nests, they were unsuccessful 90 to 95% of the time. They learned to avoid them. So if we don't have nests that they're successful in, they will learn to avoid them. What we're seeing now after 3 years, though, is they actively seek our nests out because they've been successful.
So why is the barometric pressure important? Temperature makes sense, but why pressure?
Pressure helps us tell wind movement. We've got pressure plus the heat stress index and the weather stations that we have installed in all the colonies can help us tell how the wind is moving through the nests. So if we've got a barometric pressure on the outside that's lower than the barometric pressure on the inside, then we know that we've got good movement of air through the nests. Unfortunately, we can't put an anemometer inside the nests, a wind speed monitor. It just doesn't work, but that helps us gauge, are we getting good wind movement, which dissipates the heat.
Gotcha. And how are the sensors powered?
They're powered by small batteries that can last between 16 and 20 months each. So about once a year, we go out and replace all the batteries. And then that connects, and we've got two different types of sensors. One connects directly up to satellites and feeds the information. The other type of sensor we use feeds to a server that we installed on the island that's solar powered, and that feeds to the cloud system. The reason we did that one is we're also working with the pit tag project for penguins, where passive infrared transponders, the little microchips that are put in some of the penguins, we helped them put out readers on the island. So we tied their system into our system. So when a penguin walks over the reader, it automatically uploads, this penguin is moving here. And it helps them out with their tracking.
That's pretty cool. Sorry, there's actually several questions here. So what distinguishes endangered status from the critically endangered status?
Ryan, if you want to.
I actually don't know the exact percent.
Okay.
Do you know, Kevin?
It's not so much a percentage as it's a trajectory. In the case of the African penguins, when they were reclassified from threatened to endangered, it was because the trajectory was in such a dire straits that it was known that they were in real trouble 20 years ago on it. Endangered going to critically endangered, it's because the population is decreasing so fast. We're going from 100,000 20 years ago to roughly 35,000 right now, and it's just dropping quickly. So there's not really a set number that determines it. It's species by species. If you get something like the, let's just use whooping cranes, there's only about 1,000 of them roughly left in the world, but their numbers are on the increase right now. If you've got African penguins, there's 35,000, give or take. Their numbers are declining drastically. So they're going, even though they're both critically endangered, they're both going in opposite directions.
Okay, so we do have a question that was asked kind of at the beginning that I waited till the end. What makes it so that penguins can't fly like other birds?
So when they evolved to literally fly in water. So their bone structure is different. Their wings are different. They don't have like the same like feathers, like flight feathers, like other birds. So they're really just have a wetsuit, and their wings are quite strong, so they can use them as a weapon too if they need to. So they are really just evolved for water, for swimming. So
why are they still counted as a bird?
So there's other characteristics that make them a bird, like feathers. So they are, it almost looks like they don't have feathers. It looks like neoprene, but it is teeny tiny feathers that really lock together perfectly like a wetsuit. And they were, they lay eggs, they evolved with other birds. They just diverged to become a flightless bird.
Okay. So the next few questions I'd like you both to give your take on. So we'll start with Ryan and then Kevin. What moment during your trip stood out to you the most when you were in South Africa?
One of my favorite things, there was a lot of favorite things, but was When we got to put the nest down on Bird Island, first of all, Bird Island was incredible. That remote island, we had to take a helicopter. It was my first helicopter ride. And I grew up my dad was a pilot, so I'd been in lots of planes. It was really exciting for me. But when we put the nest down after like a hard day of putting them together, and they're kind of a rough material, so your hands are kind of dirty and sore, and then seeing the penguins trying them out was amazing. And then that specific nest, the 279, where they were already courting and like braying to each other, and it was so cute, pulling twigs in. It was like amazing to see. They were like our favorite penguins now.
I say there's lots of photos of 279 pair. And then I said I've been over to Africa quite a few times. This was when we went over in December. That was my 5th time to South Africa to work with penguins there. So it goes back a little bit further than Ryan's had the opportunity. But for me, there's the strong positives of you see the birds succeeding when they've had so many struggles in the past to find suitable nesting areas. And that's the aha moment of we're making a difference on it. But the biggest impact I had is the very first time we put a nest down, and a few days later, there's a pair sitting in there, and they're comfortable, they're cool, everything looks great. And just a meter away, just 3 feet away, there's another pair sitting on a nest, and they are just panicked from heat stress. So you see that this little structure that costs $50 to make and looks like a doghouse on there makes this massive improvement in their life.
Nice. All right, this next question again to both of you. How did you get involved in zoology?
I grew up in a Chicago suburb right next to the Brookfield Zoo, and my family, my parents, my grandparents, my aunt took us to the zoo all the time. So I have 2 sisters. We all were obsessed with animals. We all knew we wanted to work with animals. One's actually a veterinarian. One's a fellow zookeeper. So I think we just always had this passion for wildlife and nature. And in college, I just tried out a million related jobs, research, zoology, everything. And I just knew for sure I wanted to work hands-on with animals and also get a chance to do the education portion of it as well.
And same here. I grew up around animals. It's always been my passion. From the time I could walk, I've been a bird person. And I knew I was going to work with animals from the time I was a kid. And I knew I was going to work in a zoo from the time I was about 9 or 10 in it. And it just, when you know it's the direction, you make it happen. And I've been in zoos for a long time. I always joke that I started my zoo career back in the Stone Ages. I've been in this since the early 90s.
Okay. So now this one's going away from those questions and to, is there a specific reason South African penguins are less popular than the other ones? They're not exactly the ones that are shown in most of the cute Disney movies.
That's our joke. Actually, my department outreach, our joke is always that they never got the better movie deals. So you don't see them March of the Penguins. You don't see them in Happy Feet. But yeah, I guess just, what do you think, Kevin? Is there anything more than they didn't get the movie deals?
It's better marketing for the Antarctic, subantarctic, and Falkland Island. It's a lot of it is the movie deals. People they grew up seeing the cold weather and temperate weather, cooler temperate weather penguins on TV, whether it was Mutual of Omaha, whether it was any of the other TV shows. African penguins just didn't have as good a marketing. And African penguins aren't even the most endangered by far and away. Galapagos penguins, yellow-eyed snares, Fiordland crested. There's a lot of penguin species that are even more endangered than African penguins in it, and they've got even worse marketing.
How do the different zoos choose which animals to concentrate the conservation efforts on?
So I think every zoo does a little bit differently. So I'm not 100% sure how AZA picked these original 10, and now it's, again, expanded to 27. I think it's just based off of animals that really needed help. But our zoo focuses on a handful of particular animals as well. So we are doing something similar now. We call it 12 by 12, and the Dallas Zoo is focusing on 12 species who really need our help over the next 12 years. So it's kind of fun. Each month we celebrate one of those animals. So we do celebrate penguins, and usually in February every year. But we are doing something similar where we have just decided 12 animals that really do need our help.
So the background on the AZA Safe, the way it happened in 2015, groups got together and decided that conservation in zoos was an amazing thing. We're one of the leading conservation groups in the nation when you put zoos together in it, but we didn't have the focus in some cases. So they said, how can we focus our conservation efforts better? SAFE came along and they found a way to get zoos to buy in to focus conservation. So AZA SAFE was, if you have a species that you're working with, if you have a species that you know needs help, tell us why. And there were dozens and dozens of species that were applied for the first round. 10 of them were chosen. Some of the application processes were 60, 70, 80 pages, justifications of why this species needs help, what threats it has. We put together quite a few, and one of them that I worked with on the very first proposal just got accepted, Asian hornbills. This is 3.5 years later. It's now a SAFE project. So it's an ongoing thing. We started with 5 of the original 10, then the other 5 were added in, now it's 27.
Nice. What made each of you want to work specifically with the South African penguins?
So when I joined the Animal Ambassador group at the Dallas Zoo about 4.5 years ago, we had 4 ambassador penguins. So penguins that we bring out to schools and libraries and teach students young and old about penguins and conservation. And it was a bird I'd never worked with before. And, you know, some people are obsessed with penguins, and I like penguins, but I wouldn't say I ever really thought twice about loving penguins until I met those birds. We have one in particular named City, who's just the sweetest penguin of all time. And I just fell in love with them and their story. And so when I found out what Kevin was doing in South Africa, I couldn't wait to try to join him. And I was, like I said, lucky enough to go in December. And that's kind of how I fell in love with penguins.
So for me, I'm a bird nut through and through. I don't have a favorite bird species. My joke is that my favorite is the type with wings. But with the penguins, when AZA SAFE was coming together, all the 7 projects were being looked at. Here's the 7 factors that are really stacked against African penguins right now. And I've worked in situ conservation around the world. I've got a decent amount of experience working in the field in there. And that project was, we need to build nests. We need to have them work. We need to work with all these different agencies, all these different environmental groups, all these different researchers in it. And it was something I knew I could do and could do successfully. And Penguin Nest Project was one of the very first AZA SAFE projects to get off the ground. So if it didn't work properly, it would have left a little bit of a sore taste in people's mouths. So and then it had to work, and luckily it has.
So this next one is, how can we get these penguins at our schools?
Yes, we obviously right now is an unusual time with COVID, but normally our ambassador animals do travel all over the DFW area, schools, libraries. We go to civic events, all kinds of things. So you can find more of that on the Dallas Zoo website under ambassador animals. But obviously right now it's kind of a weird time, but we are offering virtual programs. So if you still something that you guys are interested in the fall, and we probably quite can't travel yet, we are doing virtual programs where we have live programs. People can write in questions and answer them. So it's kind of similar to this. It's supposed to be live, but we're all moving virtual right now.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm getting some messages. It seems like YouTube is filtering some questions for some reason, but I'm going to go ahead and ask it because I'm not sure why YouTube is filtering it. But what are zoos' responses to COVID right now? Or sorry, how have the zoos responded to COVID-19?
So each zoo has to set up its own response based on the specifics of the zoo. At the Dallas Zoo, we were closed for quite a while, as most people probably know, and we had to go through the safety preparations. How can we safely welcome guests back into the zoo? And that's a huge process, because the last thing we want to do is put anybody's health at risk. We have to follow all the local mandates, all the state mandates, whatever Judge Jenkins puts out, whatever Governor Abbott puts out. We have to make sure we follow all of that. But the biggest is we also have to make sure that our teams at the zoo are safe. So we've done everything to make sure that all of our people that are there to keep the zoo up and running, keep the animals healthy and happy, keep the back areas prepared. Everything was set to keep them safe as well. There's tremendous amount. You're looking at 100-acre facility with hundreds of people there, and every one of them is important.
All right, so I think we're out of questions. If anyone else has any, go ahead and put them in before we sign out. We do have a lot of people saying we really appreciate what y'all are doing and great talk, etc. So I do appreciate both of you very much for both what you did and being willing to give this talk. For everybody who is still watching, if you like these types of talks, please consider subscribing to us so you'll know when our next one is, which our next one will be next month. And it will be talking about arson dogs, so dogs that are used for investigating arson. So if you are curious about that, please call in, subscribe, or follow us on any of our social media. We have Facebook, Instagram, as well as Twitter. So thank you again to y'all for giving this talk and everybody else for calling in, and I really appreciate it. See y'all hopefully next month.
Thank you.